Do you collect old video games? I've been collecting old video games, or retro games as some people call them, since 2012. And when I started collecting, my world was very different than it is today. I've been playing video games since I was 5 years old. But I'm 39 years old now, and I have a wife and 2 kids and a whole bunch of responsibilities that I did not have in 2012. The world was very different then than it is now for me. And I want to go over, what I wish people had told me when I first started collecting retro video games. And I'm going to go over 10 different things. So here we go. One of the scariest things about video games is how much the prices change. Prices fluctuate a lot when it comes to video games. It is crazy how a game could be worth a whole bunch of money and then all of a sudden isn't worth hardly anything. But a game keeps rising in price, and a lot of it has to do with scarcity and lack of other options. For example, Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door on GameCube for the longest time was going for as much as $100 or even more. And now it's down to a lot more reasonable prices because there's a Nintendo Switch remaster of that. And some people were like, man, maybe I don't really need this GameCube version anymore. I can play it on a more modern console like the Switch. It's also crazy how much a price goes up when there's just more and more people finding out about a specific game. Back in 2012, one of my biggest white whales was Metal Gear Solid on the Game Boy Color. I actually recently sold my copy, but when I bought it with the instruction manual. It was $27. Well, guess what, folks? It goes for a whole lot more than $27 nowadays, and it just blew my mind how much it was going for. And at the end of the day, I was like, you know what? This was, for me, a white whale for the longest time, but the reality is I wasn't going to play it. And I never hardly ever played it. I never even tried to play it. And there's a lot more modern ways you can play these old games. So yeah, I didn't feel like that was one I just had to hold on to. Even though it was a really uncommon game, I just felt like, you know what? I could be spending my money differently and if I didn't have this particular game. So I sold it, and I think that's what a lot of collectors have done over the last few years is they found, you know what? Maybe I need to get rid of these particular games to make way for newer games, for other games, for games that maybe mean a little more to me. Insert skid here. Condition is everything when it comes to video game collecting. So many people collect a video game, and whether the condition of the game is good might determine whether that person buys that game or not. It is a huge, big deal for a lot of collectors. But there are varying degrees of how much of a big deal it really actually is. Some people, they want a sealed game. They want it complete in box. And I'm talking with the NES game that has to have the styrofoam at the bottom, okay? But some people don't care. Some people are like, you know what? I will take the worst copy you have of it as long as it's playable and in working condition. For example, this copy right here of Resident Evil Director's Cut. I think I got it for $1 at a gaming convention in like 2018 or whatever it was. And yeah, it plays and works, surprisingly, but it's in terrible condition. There are better ways to play this. You could digitally buy this game on the PS3, this Director's Cut, or you could buy it on GOG as well, I believe. So there's a lot of great ways to play it. So maybe having this as some kind of collector piece doesn't make a lot of sense, but if you want this strictly for the purpose of playing, yeah, the condition, how it looks on the outside might not matter as long as it plays. Well, folks, I got some good news. Actually, some random stranger decided to sell me this copy of Musha and Little Samson, and for a whole lot of money. Isn't it great that I got these? Wait a minute. These aren't real. These are reproductions. What in the heck? Yeah, I can't stress how important it is to be aware of reproductions and fake cartridges. Reproductions and fake cartridges were not much of a thing when I first started collecting back in 2012, but they've become a problem actually and are running rampant because you have websites like AliExpress, which at the time a lot of people didn't think was such a big deal because a lot of people were ordering cartridges purposely just for the pleasure of playing it, and being able to say, oh, I popped in a cartridge and I could play it, And a lot of people, of course, have gone the route of getting a flash card, getting a EverDrive or something like that. But a lot of people, unfortunately, who are new to retro gaming don't necessarily understand that there's a lot of fakes out there. And one of the most faked games is Pokemon. Pokemon games, especially on Game Boy Advance and the original Game Boy Color, are faked quite often. And a lot of places like Half Price Books or even these new GameStop retro stores have been taking these fake games. And it's a problem. It's an epidemic, really, or whatever. You know, if you write reproduction on it and, you know, and you're keeping it for your own personal use, I don't think there's a big deal with that. But it's the people who are trying to pass it off as the real deal and trying to sell it to pawn shops. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. And it's something you have to be aware of when you start collecting retro video games.
I'm getting claustrophobia. The walls are closing in. There's just not enough space.
Back in like 2013, 2014, when I was living in a small little apartment, space was everything. Now that I have a big house, you know what? I have all the space I really need. I have all the space and I have great ways of organizing. It's so important to get organized early when you start collecting old video games. And if you're going to collect more, you really need to consider, like, where are you going to put this stuff? Are you going to put them in shoe boxes, or are you going to display them proudly on a shelf? Or are you going to put them in drawers? There's a lot of great options for storing your video games. But one of the biggest problems overall is space. You know, if you don't have the space, it's probably not a great idea to start a video game collection or just go all in. But you know what? There's a lot of great ways to utilize your space that you have. And there's a lot of great videos out there of people who've talked about that. I think space is one of those things I wish I'd known when I first started collecting old video games.
This cartridge is from another region.
One of the things I wish I had learned about retro video games when I first started collecting was that there's games in different regions that are actually sometimes cheaper. For example, Batman Returns on the Super Famicom is cheaper than the Super Nintendo counterpart. Now, something to consider and be aware of is the fact that a lot of games in different regions have lockout systems, so you can't play those games, or they play at a different megahertz or something like that, you know, so they might sound off if you try to play them in an NTSC or whatever, you know, system versus playing the European version one. But also there's ways around that. For example, with the Super Nintendo, you can actually clip the two little plastic pieces and you could put your Super Famicom game right in there. But another thing to consider too is a lot of games might not be in English. For example, the game Mother, which I have on the original Famicom, a buddy of mine gave that to me as a present, does not obviously have English in it, and that could be a problem. Though there are fan-translated versions of games, or what a lot of people will order a fake or reproduction version that has the English translation on it, and maybe still buy that region game so they can say they have it, and they can say they have that in their collection, but they'll still be able to play that game in their native language. So there's a lot of region variations, and I think that's important to consider when buying retro games, and it's something I wish I'd known.
Oh, my precious Zelda Twilight Princess, with the amiibo and everything. Oh, this thing looks so beautiful. And guess what? All you frickin' Switch lords who talk trash about the Wii U, you don't get to play this game. You'll never get to play this game. It's never coming to the Switch. It's coming to Switch too. I'm telling you right now.
Packaging is everything, honestly. You know, it's really cool to have a system complete in box. When things have the original manual and all the working things about it, that really creates a lot of value or whatever and makes something a little more sought after than it would be if it's just loose by itself, whether it's just a loose cartridge or a loose disc. Though loose cartridges seem to hold their value much more than a loose disc, because loose discs, of course, are much more fragile and are prone to scratches. But Blu-rays, though, I will say, when it comes to like PlayStation 3 and for example, you know, PS4, Xbox One, they're a lot more scratch resistant, so a lot of people seem to buy those two a little more frequently, but everybody, when it comes to discs, typically wants the case. That's really important to a lot of collectors, whereas a loose cartridge, you know, a lot of people are much more okay with that idea.
Back in my day, video games used to be fun. You know, you get them from the rental store here. You see this little case is from a rental store. You got GoldenEye here. GoldenEye is the greatest first-person shooter of all time. You just put it in your N64. There's no DLC. There's no microtransactions. It just works. It just plain works. And you get to play as James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, the best 007 ever. That's right. Yes, James frickin' Bond. GoldenEye. You gotta get GoldenEye.
Yeah, growing up in the 90s, there really was something to be said about, you know, grabbing your golden controller here, and popping in your Rumble pack and playing some GoldenEye, it was a different time in my life, that's for darn sure. I loved playing GoldenEye, but if I have to be really honest with myself, a lot of games like GoldenEye have not aged well as far as first-person shooters go. That game, you know, the controls were fine for what they were, you know, and they, you know, it was designed the way it was designed, but man, I just feel like that is a game that has not aged well. I mean, the graphics just leave a lot to be desired. I mean, they just look so ridiculous. You know, it was those early 3D games, and there's so many early 3D games that have things that I just feel like are super dated. I mean, if I have to be really honest, you know, I was talking about Resident Evil earlier or whatever. I am not a fan of tank controls at all. I wasn't a fan back then, and I'm even less of a fan now in my old age, I guess. You know, and when it comes to first-person shooters, now I don't want to go back and play GoldenEye. You know, I've played some of more modern shooters or games with a modern sensibility when it comes to shooting action. For example, Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon right here. Now, this game is nostalgic. This game is actually retro in the sense of style, not necessarily age, you know, because a lot of people use the word retro to mean old when it actually just means actually a throwback or a callback, but it doesn't matter. We're never going to convince people and change people's mind about what retro means, okay? I've talked about that in a number of my videos over the years. Yeah, this game is absolutely a callback to the old days or whatever. I mean, Michael Biehn from Terminator does the voice of the cyborg Rex Power Colt. It's just fantastic. The controls are very tight with this game or whatever. And you know what? They're much more accessible. I mean, I loved GoldenEye. GoldenEye was incredible. It was a great 4-player romp. Maybe you're all gathered around in a basement, you know, y'all got your Rumble packs in and you're playing 4-player and somebody's got the golden gun or you're doing slappers only. You know, it was a different time and, you know, it was so cool. But man, I just don't have much interest in going back to that time when it comes to certain games. Some games, in my opinion, were great for their time, but just, you know what? I have more modern sensibilities. I've changed and the world has changed. So, and that's totally okay. Folks, I got some bad news. My PS1 stopped working. Basically what happened was it'll turn on, but there's no video. It doesn't matter what I do. The PS1 stopped working. I've had this PS1 for so long. A moment of silence, everybody. Miss you, PS1. We had some good times together. We played so many games together. You had all my fantasies, my Final Fantasies on it. There's so many Final Fantasies on PS1, except Final Fantasy 3, and I don't know why. Rest in paradise, old friend. Yeah, the thing about old video game consoles and buying old video game consoles is, well, they're old. Guess what? A lot of them haven't been properly maintained. And because of that, a lot of them are prone to failure. Just like video games themselves are prone to failure. I have old NES cartridges that stopped working on me. And now they're basically just a collector piece in my collection because I can't really sell them because everybody wants to play the old games. You know, like I have a copy of Batman Return of the Joker. Doesn't work anymore, unfortunately. And consoles are exactly the same. The difference is obviously a console has a lot more moving parts and can sometimes be easy to replace and sometimes easy to work on, such as an old NES. You know, replacing the 72-pin connector or boiling it. A lot of people boil the pins. That's the other thing people do. Or in my case, I have a blinking light win that I installed in my original NES. I actually have a blue NES that I painted blue many, many years ago. And I have a blinking light win in that, and that works great. That is a great thing. The only downside is the cartridges are hard to take out. Actually, that's the only downside. So oftentimes I will use the old front-loading NES. I have another additional front-loading NES that I like to use. But there's a lot of things about consoles that unfortunately it's hard to fix, or maybe you don't necessarily have the necessarily specific skill set to fix them. You know, you can look at YouTube videos and stuff, and that can be really helpful, and a lot of times you can figure out really important things from those YouTube videos. But also, you know, you run the risk of ruining the thing yourself. So a lot of times people are hesitant to do that, and they'll just go out and buy a new one, you know. Like I'm on the 5th PlayStation 3 I own. I talked about that in my video, why you should get a PS3 in 2024. It just depends on what the system is. You know, there's a lot of old systems, and a lot of these systems sometimes have a lot of moving parts, you know, especially some of the stuff that came out later past, you know, the 32-bit and 64-bit era. So that's something I wish I had known, how, you know, vulnerable some of these old systems were and how to better maintain them. Hey everybody, just wanted to give a quick shout out to my buddy Andy who hooked me up with this sweet copy of Breath of Fire on the Super Nintendo. This is one heck of an RPG, and I want to thank Andy personally for this. This is incredible. That's what I love about retro gaming. It's all about community. It's about coming together as a community. And when we come together as a community and we hook each other up, we all win. We all get to play great games, and that's what it's all about, man. One thing I did not realize when I started collecting old video games was how important community is. Community is key, honestly. Community is huge. I think we can all relate to that. I mean, sure, you could just go buy everything you ever wanted off eBay, but what's the point sometimes, of just collecting this stuff if you have no one to share your joy with? And I think that's what's really cool about retro game collecting is all the friends you meet along the way. And it starts out as simple as, I went to a convention, and I ran into this person. I really had a good conversation with them, or they have a YouTube channel. I think about my buddy Nick. We've traded a bunch of games over the years, and he lives like an hour from me. I also think about, too, my buddy Master System Marceau. We have a podcast together, actually. And all these things wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been into retro video games. We have this same commonality. We share this basic thing that we like to collect old video games, or we like to play old video games. So I think community is key. You can get some good trades, you can get some good deals. Not only that, you can make some great friends along the way. And I think that's really important because I think for a lot of us adults with our busy lives, it can be hard to make friends sometimes. And I think this is a great way, is through this hobby of retro gaming. So
I have a secret, everybody. I have an obsession with Quest 64.
as I said before, community is key when it comes to video game collecting. It's great to have people around you with a similar interest, but a lot of times you can come across people with conflicting opinions, and your love for video games can become an obsession. An obsession is okay to a certain degree, but when your obsession goes too far, when it all of a sudden goes to the point of this is, unhealthy, that's not good. Like when you get upset and angry to the point that because somebody just disagrees with you on a certain game, you know what? That's obviously not healthy. Or you get really obsessive about the quality of your stuff, the collection. Your collection just can never be enough. Collecting games that I'm never going to play doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I always collect to play. That's at the end of the day why you'd get something. Or maybe there's other reasons, of course, people collect. People collect something because they want the physical version but have another way to play it, which I think is all right too, because maybe that game means something to you personally, and I totally understand that. We all collect for different reasons, but that collection can become an obsession. It can get in the way of our personal relationships. And when it becomes that type of obsession, that is not good. Obsession is something I wish I'd been told about when I started collecting video games. How people can get a little bit crazy, but that's okay. And I mean, we're all humans. We all make mistakes. We're not all perfect people, but I think sometimes we have to rein it in. And that's another thing why community is so important. Because we're friends with these people. If we're close with these people, I think we should always be able to tell them the truth. But that's a part of building relationships, and that's why community is key. So if you see a friend of yours, they're getting really obsessed and they're letting it get out of hand, it's so important to be able to tell them that. So yeah, the aspect of obsession and community go hand in hand. It's so important that we tell our friends the truth, even if that truth might be not what they necessarily want to hear. I love video games and I love collecting video games, and I am totally unapologetic about that. It is my money, and I'll do what I want with my money. And I know how a lot of people feel that way, as long as you're not hurting anybody or hurting yourself, what's the big deal? So those are the 10 things that I wish somebody had told me when I started collecting old video games. So what are your thoughts? What are the 10 things you wish somebody had told you before you started collecting old video games? Comment below. Love to hear what you have to say. Anyway, stay awesome in this universe. Bye.